Well, good morning, and here we go again. We're using Studio B because we've still got the slight camera problem, but at least we can bring a break an egg to you this morning with slightly more optimism than we've been able to of late. I'm going to move this camera, if you'll forgive me, because otherwise you're going to see just the top of my head. Mind you, some of you might well say, why not? What a good idea. um, there are some signs that the Russians, or Mr. Putin, President Putin, are going to enter into some sort of talk with the president of Zelensky of Ukraine. So there is some thought of breakthrough. That doesn't mean to say that the Russians have backed off militarily. So I think it's a question of let's watch, but with a little bit more hope than we've had. The effects of this war are going to be far-reaching, and while the Ukrainians and the Russians are talking, Joe Biden and the White House senior staff, senior administration have been banned from entering Russia. So, quid pro quo. Boris, of course, never far from controversy, is trying hard to bring the Saudis online so that we don't have so much dependent upon Russian oil. But of course, as one newspaper reported on the day that he starts to negotiate with the Saudis, they managed to execute 80 people. I always find it very difficult. I've trained several Saudis, in fact, quite a few. And I've also dealt with some Western people who work in Saudi. And they tend to say that things aren't quite as bad as we make out. But by the same token, is that if you measure Saudi by our standards of human rights in the West, then they are pretty damn awful. But really, they don't have a great deal of conscience. But lopping off somebody's head, summary justice. And one of the things that is critical about the death penalty in Saudi is that of those 80 people, some apparently were condemned in what can best be described as a kangaroo court. So we have to be a bit careful about who we deal with. But by the same token, the world is full of villains. And you become rapidly isolationist if you won't actually deal with them. You can't actually change sovereign states overnight, as indeed Mr. Putin is finding out. He's having a far more difficult time than he thought. And it is not easy for any of us. So we, as they would say, you cannot have your cake and eat it. You've got to decide whether you want the cake to sit on the plate or whether you really want it to scoffed and out of sight. It is a difficult one. And of course, the moralists, the people who are strong on ethics, and rightly so, will start to yell and scream, and we shouldn't be dealing with this state. But by the same token, is they very rarely have an option. Is if we don't deal with them, is where does the oil come from? And they are the first, quite often, to give up their offices, aren't they? Yes, ha ha ha, or their homes, ha ha ha, for the comfortable stance of not having oil or gas or whatever we happen to be using. So I do feel for Boris. I think, well, Boris being Boris, of course, he would still have charged ahead. But I think that any sane person, if they'd have been able to look into a crystal ball and say, this is what I'm expected to look after from if I become prime minister, I think they would have run the other way, starting, of course, with COVID. And then followed on by Brexit, and followed on by the economic problems, followed on by war, followed on by you name it. We've got it. and some of the worst weather that we've had for a long time. Incidentally, talking about weather, watch out for this afternoon. There's going to be some heavy rain. This morning is scattered cloud. It's not scattered at the moment. It's fairly grey, and a light breeze. But when the breeze comes, watch out that it doesn't actually drive the rain into you. And I think a high of about 12. So warm enough, or at least getting back to being mild in that sense. But we can expect some rain today, a little later on. Okay, let's see what the papers are saying. Zelensky's NATO concession as Putin turns to Plan C. That's from the I. And the Guardian, Ukraine's NATO concession as airstrikes batter the capital. Yeah, in other words, yes, we are going to start to talk peace, aren't we? Yes, but we're not going to take away the heavy metal glove. We're going to keep on hitting you on the basis that undoubtedly, if we keep on hitting you, the terms that you will expect from us will be quite light. One thing that is coming through from the headlines, and that is that President Zelensky has said Ukraine will never belong to or become a member of NATO. And that is one of the reasons that Putin has given for going to war, is that a neighboring state would have a military organization, a large military organization on its doorstep. And to be fair to Russia, they've always had that, taken that stance. The only thing is that they've arbitrarily decided that they'll do something about it. After it's existed as almost like a mini Cold War for many, many years. But there we are. It is an excuse, I assume. Let's see. The rush to take in Ukrainians, and you're Putin us up, mate. That's which paper is that? I can't see, but it's lovely. Anyway, we'll carry on. We'll see where this is going to take us this morning. Huh. The Times. War refugees head for new lives with British hosts. Zelensky, we can't join NATO, and he's been quite clear about that. The Daily Telegraph, Zelensky, Ukraine will never join NATO. And somebody is pointing out that Putin has got a lot of wealth in London, so his pocket is being hit. But then if you're president of a big country like Russia, do you care? It's the second story, which is the Nazanin, the British subject being held in Iran. There is some suggestion she may be let out of prison. That's sort of become a bit of a it's a forgotten story, but. That lady being held in Iran, and we've tried many ways to get her out. That looks hopeful too. The Daily Express, hell on earth, but a glimmer of hope. Zelensky's NATO concession to Russia as the war death toll soars. So in other words, George Orwell is not out doing war at the moment, and we're just going to have to accept the fact that this is a bellicose government in Russia, because actually the Russian people aren't bellicose at all. They are charming and lovely, and I've never been treated so very well as a guest as I have when I've been working in Moscow. And I have many friends who are very civilized and delightful. Right, okay, let's see, the Guardian. Ukraine's NATO concession as airstrikes batter the capital. after 6 years of hope, Iran will reach Zagat Ratcliffe. That's the Nazanin Zaghari, Ratcliffe, held in Iran for 6 years. And hopefully there's some movement there. Perhaps everybody is trying to deal with that while the focus is on the rest of the world. The Daily Mail, court ordeal of the Russian TV editor whose courage inspired the world. And that's the lady female journalist who walked onto set in the leading television station in Russia, and with a sign saying it's all fake. Don't listen to what you're being told. What we're telling you is a pack of lies. It's pretty heavy stuff in any country, but in Russia. Anyway, she's been hauled into court, and one would have thought so. Also, the Daily Mail, City of Fear and Defiance. He's saying actually the reporter is saying there are a number of civilians who are willing to take on and face down Putin, but also that in Kiev, the capital, they are preparing to dig in and fight Russian troops, and as it says, preparing to face down Putin. The eye, Putin turns to Plan C, and it has a picture of an apartment block that was struck yesterday by missiles, killing some and making it totally uninhabitable, adding more to the stream of people who want to get out and to come here and elsewhere in the world. Yes, we are being very generous in terms of the homes. Apparently, some 5,000 people went online yesterday and said, yes, you can come and stay with us. That's very nice. The main problem, though, is the availability shows us to be a caring people. The bureaucracy shows us to have leaders who really don't understand what it's all about again. But there we go. Right, the Financial Times, the West turns up heat on Moscow with moves against oligarchs and the military. The sanctions get tougher and tougher all the time. And apparently they are having some effect. But my warning stays. And if you actually have done any shopping at all, even if you're only for one item, you will have seen that there's been in many prices in the supermarkets a rise of 20% in some items, in many items, in fact. And that is the price that we're going to pay for the moment. And it depends on how tough we can get, or how tough our leaders think that they can get without getting turfed out of the next election. The Metro, which is the London paper, but which is certainly seen in a good part of the southeast. Ollie Lolly crackdown. You're not blinging anymore. One of the things that a lot of Russians like to send back luxury goods from London. I mean, how the hell anybody can tell a bar of soap from the pound shop and a bar of soap from, I don't know, say Harrods, it defeats me. It all seems to be the same. But anyway, as long as it's got a brand name on it, everybody goes wild and will pay all sorts of extra. Well, the Russians can't actually send it home anymore. They're banned. And it's really a problem for the very wealthy. And again, part of our strategy has been to hit very wealthy Russians on the basis that they are the people that, if anybody can shift Putin, they're the people on the basis they say, look here, we've got a few billions tucked away. But one thing, I'll have a word about that in a moment, because that's not all that it seems either. The Sun, Chelsea, Trump's UK ambassador in a £2 billion swoop for blues. and the American ambassador, former American ambassador, is said to be ready to bid for Chelsea. What is his name? Is Woody Johnson. I love those American names. Woody Johnson. So there are all sorts of people in the frame for it. But I rather imagine that it's going to be a favourite son situation, that whoever bids is going to be whoever the government wants to win. The Daily Star, Mission Imposter. Lookalike President Zelensky escapes Ukraine thanks to a lookalike Putin and a lookalike Jong-un. Apparently some people who are lookalikes, and in fact, they actually are professional lookalike people, is they managed to sneak out of Russia by impersonating President Zelensky, and in some cases, Putin. Excuse me, let me through that door. Who are you? Can't you tell by my looks? Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir. Yes, in you go. And it's not Putin at all. All right, okay. So those are the headlines. More or less, they are mostly that there is a glimmer of peace. That the refugee crisis is being, to all intents and purposes, handled reasonably well, and that we are going to we're going to see some cessation of activity, military activity in Ukraine. But I'm afraid to say that it hasn't happened yet. So we really do have to be very careful indeed. All right, let me see what the time is. 8:25. We're a little bit late on this morning. Once again, sorting out one or two little technical problems, but I'm getting better at it. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, if I can remember exactly what it was, is that a city of fear and defiance, and that's the headline in the Mail. And it is all very well for us to sit back and say, "Oh, that's jolly good, aren't they brave?" But you know, we are so. A lot of the decisions that were made and supported in the Second World War by our government and other governments in the world was that the average citizen was experiencing the toughness of war. We're not. What we're doing is we're saying to really the world is that the war in Ukraine, we're not suffering, except at the petrol pumps, except at the heating centers, and a little bit of the food. But, you know, we don't really know what it is. And it's almost as if we're patting people on the head and sort of saying, there. You're very nice people, and we understand that you're at war. Well, the reality, the bloody reality of war is quite different. I've never actually been caught up as a journalist in a full-fledged war. I was in Northern Ireland for 15 years, right throughout the Troubles. But in some ways, and I don't mean to be demeaning to the people of Northern Ireland, but it was small potatoes compared with what's happening here, and also what's happened in other wars in the past. But war is nobody's fun. A bomb is a bomb, a missile is a missile, a rifle is a rifle, and a soldier with a bayonet is a soldier with a bayonet. And we do not understand that because we don't face it on a day-to-day basis. It's funny. If you lived in Northern Ireland, as I did for that period in the Troubles, if you wanted to go into any store or if you wanted to go into the main streets and through checkpoints, you were always patted down and you put your hands up like this. And it became automatic. You just walked in through the front door. It didn't matter whether you saw a security guard or anything. You did this. And I can remember coming over to London on a couple of occasions and walking into a store in the West End, and I went in and I did that, and people wondered what the hell I was doing. I was leading a prayer group or something. Those sort of things are indicative of you're living in a war zone. I mean, that's no putting your hands up is no hurt, but what it is it's a sign that you really understand what it's like to be living in those circumstances, and we do not in this country in the main. We do not, and it's about time that we actually got our act together, we really brought out the horrors of war. Now, the question of Boris going to Saudi, this is a moral dilemma. Yes, it is a moral dilemma. How far do you throw morals and ethics aside or into the waste bin during moments of crisis? The Saudis can make a difference to us. And quite often what's happened is that in the past, if as good middle-class people with a couple of shekels in our pocket to spend is making alliances with a nation that is not so nice, that's comfortable, and we do it. We only got to see one of the massive ones, and that's China. How many things? I suppose if I looked on this broadcast desk here, I could turn up all sorts of things with a little label on it, made in China. And we're quite comfortable with that, even though the human rights issues in China are as critical as they are elsewhere. But that doesn't matter. We need these things, so therefore our conscience is solved one way or another, and we use it. We don't have a conscience when it doesn't suit us. So to start to get all uptight about Boris making a deal with the Saudis to try and ease some of our pain is, if you really want to go and protest and be against it, by all means do, but be consistent. You should be protesting against China. You should be protesting against North Korea. You should be protesting against Iran, Iraq. Protesting Qatar in the Gulf states is already actually it's banned by its own people. I mean, the fellow states around it. This issue of looking as if you've just come from communion is that it's a question of not only personal morality, but government morality. Should we actually be imposing sanctions on a whole host of countries other than Russia? Of course we won't, because that puts you into an isolationist role. You won't have a lot of the things that we have now decided are necessary. You know, there are a few people now who still use it because it's still manufactured. During the war and post-war period, the only coffee you could get in this country was something called camp coffee. And it came out of a bottle, and it was a sort of a gooey chicory essence, a sticky bit that you put into a cup and added hot water and then some milk. And I grew up for a long time thinking that was coffee. In fact, it was almost me going to North America for the first time when I found out what real coffee was. And now I go into a coffee shop and it's, do you want large, medium, or, you know, they will have fancy names. Do you want a latte, or do you want a chicorino or a chacarino or whatever the hell it is? It's like Americano, I think, instead of a plain coffee now, it's Americano. But for the longest time, you would go into a coffee shop, of which there weren't many. The proliferation was of tea shops. And it's only in well, the last 20 years or so that we've slowly come around to the American idea that coffee is superior to tea. But it is what I'm trying to point out is that the difference when you're at war is you don't have a choice. You have a bottle of a gooey substance, chicory essence, camp coffee, and that's what you got. And if you went into a restaurant, you said coffee, and the most options that you get is, do you want it milk and sugar? And that was it. No great lengthy list of different types of coffee, different makes of coffee, different formats of coffee. The fact of the matter is, we would have to go back probably to that sort of privation. Yes, even to, I was just thinking for a moment, is, well, I was about to say, well, not quite camp coffee. But yes, we probably would. Because if we actually impose sanctions on all sorts of places which are equally as guilty of aggression, of breaking human rights as Moscow, is you could cover 3/4 of the world's surface. So what do? We compromise only when we are faced with difficult decisions. Do the great and the good and the just manage to stamp their little feet and say, "Oh, we shouldn't be doing this. God, oh, let's we stand for justice. We stand for right." Ha ha ha! Do we heck? We are as driven by the necessity for luxury as anywhere else, and I find it very difficult when we see, particularly politicians. Well, mind you, I don't have much truck with politicians. I really, there are half a dozen decent politicians that I've met in my life. I mean, really decent ones. One was in Canada, on the far coast in British Columbia, where the deputy premier, who is the late Grace McCarthy, was one of the most honest politicians I've ever come across. She was in it to try and help her fellow citizen, not for any financial gain. She didn't need it, but nonetheless, she was as honest as the day is long. And she was a lifelong friend. And the world, and British Columbia in particular, were the worse for her passing. You wouldn't find that now. I mean, the youngsters, oh, Grace McCarthy, no. I mean, they're full of the hot air that pulls down statues and does all sorts of things. But when it gets down to war, it is, well, no, I still want to go to my coffee shop. 2 is our present mayor, Stephen Catlin. Stephen is as straight as a die, and he is a good politician. You have to get used to Stephen because he's like me. He's a curmudgeon. He's a lovely curmudgeon. But whenever you listen to him, his talk and his communication is all about how to make politics and how to make life in Lewis that little better. And strangely enough, not always everybody's cup of tea, but also I consider to be amongst my friends Norman Baker, our former MP. Now, Norman was a very, very controversial character, and I may say that Norman and I have crossed swords as well as being good friends. But the fact of the matter is that he is once again an honest politician. Now, if we've got 2 here and British Columbia has got 1, that means that scattered across the globe, we've probably got 100 or so decent politicians. But that's only about the number that I would be prepared to place a bet on at one of the betting shops or whatever it is. I forget. I don't bet, so I don't know the names of these places. Ladbrokes, is it? Yeah, okay. And I'm not suggesting that we've got a corner on honest politicians in this part of the world. Perhaps we have. Perhaps there aren't any anywhere else. But when I see people pouncing around, talking about the ethics of dealing with Saudi Arabia, and knowing just a little bit about Saudi Arabia, I would like to think that we are a nation rather more metal than screaming and shouting and pulling down statues. That we have got depth, we've got meat on our bones, that we're prepared to talk when things are wrong and to condemn, but to condemn unilaterally and not to pick and choose because it suits us, because that demeans us as individuals and it demeans us as a nation. And if you like, it demeans us in the Western world. And that's another story. Anyway, the morality of war. Oh, 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 what a lovely war, as the stage play says. The morality of governance. Stuff it in your back pocket. Make rules that are good for one lot and not for the other. The morality of who we deal with. And that can come down to people can boycott here on spurious grounds. I mean, all my life, I've never heard such rubbish and nonsense about McDonald's. Whether you like McDonald's or not, that's entirely a personal choice. But because some of its practices in various parts of the world are less than we would expect here by British law, or the Americans might expect, does not mean that we can land McDonald's with the criticism that it undertakes. And actually, of course, it is a shouting matter for the middle classes. But once again, it's absolutely hilarious that sometimes we don't have a McDonald's in Lewes, but I've been into the one in New Haven, and of course I've been dealing with or going into as a customer McDonald's all over the world. This is not my cup of tea really, but nonetheless. But it is funny to see somebody who condemns on the outside but finds it very convenient, thank you, to go in and have a hamburger, a McDonald's hamburger. This is a Big Mac. It's convenient, you see. It's convenient. Yes, it's convenient. And let's not let convenience get in the way of our moral approach to various communities and societies and organizations for that matter, and history. If we're going to be moral and ethical, let's be moral and ethical, not moral and ethical on the basis of, well, you know, I mean, it's a bit, you hear people who have very little idea of politics or policies until it actually hits them in the pocketbook. And you say, well, why did you vote for so-and-so? Well, he has such a nice smile. He's such a nice man. Oh, God help us. We got a bad enough lot, but can you imagine 650 nice people in the House of Commons? All right, I'm rambling a little bit, but I think you get the point. And we're now it's 8:39, and I'm going to say toodle pip. Once again, the weather outside is it's going to be scattered cloud and sunshine a little bit this morning. It's not at the moment. It's fairly grey and dull. The breeze will be slight or well, moderate, but this afternoon we're going to get some really heavy rain. So from lunchtime onwards, I would make sure that you've got either an umbrella or a heavy coat or whatever. Don't be fooled into thinking that at 12 degrees, which is relatively mild, that you can trot out without any sort of outer clothing. Well, I don't know about that. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow. If we aren't back before, for the moment, let us say toodle pip and see you later.